A speedier and more consistent regulatory review process. And back in 2020, the EBA's SRT report kind of envisaged this bifurcation between the kind of simpler transactions and the more complex transaction reviews. So it comes out of that. But I think there's an additional desire now, in light of the growth of the market and just generally, to be efficient in terms of regulatory time and have less time on that kind of ex-ante review process, put a bit more of that on the banks, and liberate regulators to have a think about the market more generally and kind of issue spotting. Plus, fast track inherently incentivizes simpler transactions, and I think the ECB would see that as kind of a benefit in itself. So what it's not is STS or a subset of any of the STS requirements. It's a completely separate checklist that you have to go through. And to an extent, what it is an advanced application of some of the proposals in that EBA SRT report. And there's a process point there. It's kind of unfortunate because that report has never been consulted on, let alone legislated. So it's suboptimal that it's now becoming kind of regulatory practice without that process having happened. So what is taken, first of all, from the SRT report? The quantitative CRT commensurateness test and the cash flow models that support that are applied, although that was pretty contentious, and what the ECB do is to tweak a number of the kind of more problematic assumptions that were associated, make it a lot more workable potentially. They also take the restrictions that are proposed around call options and other early termination events, and they turn those into kind of mandatory text that you have to include in your transactions. That's been worked up by a bunch of law firms. And that's sort of relatively tight and investor friendly within the scope of the possible. They also take the mandatory triggers to flip from pro rata amortization to sequential amortization and apply those. Annoyingly, they're not quite the same as the ones that apply for STS purposes. And they take the kind of high level requirements around credit protection, it having to be a function of the protected tranche size, but not the kind of more contentious tests for high cost credit protection. So that's all from the SRT report. Then on top of that, there's a bunch of extra stuff. There is a requirement for portfolio size. You have materiality caps in terms of an 8 billion portfolio maximum. You have a 25 BIP max reduction in CET1 capital. The granularity requirements in terms of having to have a kind of 2% max concentration limit and a kind of 100 exposure effective end in the portfolio. You can't have NPL deals. The originator has to not be a newbie at group level. Deals with ramp-up periods out. And then in terms of the assets, they have to be banking book assets. They have to be performing. You can't have any leveraged assets in there, and you need to be making your protection payment within 6 months. Quite pointed, actually, in terms of the kind of current discussion around leverage in the market. There's a requirement that you're not closely connected with your investor or providing finance in connection with the investment. So in terms of the process, you're under the fast track giving notice a month in advance of your closing rather than 3 months in the kind of current process. And the ECB kind of providing those final docs within 15 working days of closing, and the ECB is coming back within 8 days of that. So it's not lightning fast, but it's a distinct improvement on the status quo and on what the SRT report was proposing. So very workable, I think. So yeah, we're currently in this kind of 6-month testing phase that runs to the end of June, where you've got originators having to kind of notify both under the existing 3-month process and the kind of fast track process. And at the end of that phase, the ECB is going to have a look at what's happened, whether it's comfortable and happy with the data that it's been getting and whether it needs to treat the criteria at all. And I would say, there's definitely potentially in terms of traditional securitizations, some room for maybe improvement there in terms of the criteria. So when they've done that, hopefully they'll turn around and apply this as a standalone process, so you're not having to make a dual notification under the two systems. Would be good. Primarily it's the people and that kind of exchange of news and views and experience. Does anyone say it's the biscuits? Well, we're going to have, we'll know what's come out of the Commission's consultation, and that's either going to be major or a major disappointment. Also, it's kind of a crunch, make or break sort of year in terms of international capital standards, actually. And, their resilience in the face of more nationalist politics. And clearly that's a major driver of this market.